The key didn't turn. Mara Ellison paused, shifted her canvas tote higher on her shoulder and tried again slower this time, willing the deadbolt to give. It didn't. A dull, stubborn resistance met her hand the same way her father used to block the kitchen door with his body when she'd tried to storm out as a teenager. Only this time, the lock wasn't symbolic. It was physical, real, changed. She blinked at the antique brass handle worn smooth from years of her own touch, then stepped back onto the porch and stared at the dark wood frame of the front door. No scratches, no visible damage, just the unnerving truth the house wasn't letting her in. Mara glanced down at Junie's little turquoise duffel bag by her feet. Her daughter had begged to bring it to camp, even though it wasn't waterproof or practical. It had sparkles and stars, just like Junie liked it. 2 days ago, they had driven up the coast to drop her off at an overnight summer camp near Charleston. Mara had cried the entire way home. Junie hadn't. She'd waved from the cabin steps like a kid who belonged to the world, not just her mother. Now, home felt unfamiliar, and her chest felt tight. She walked off the porch and around the side of the house, brushing past the hydrangeas she'd planted with Junie last spring. When they bloomed, Blue Mara always took it as a good omen. Not today. The side gate was unlatched. She frowned. It was never left open. The backyard was quiet except for the distant hum of cicadas and something fainter laughter. A woman's, familiar. Then a man's, lower, shorter. Her stomach turned to stone. She moved to the back window heart, thudding. Inside her own kitchen stood Griffin, her younger brother, all 6 feet of laid-back charm and failed startups leaning against her marble-topped island. And across from him, holding a mug, was Haley. His wife, her hand rested lightly on her belly. The mug she held was one of Mara's, the white one with the chipped handle, the one Junie had painted. "You got this, Mom," in purple ceramic marker 2 birthdays ago. Mara stumbled back a step, her heel catching on the flagstone path. She gripped the edge of the window to steady herself. She didn't knock, not yet. Her brain scrambled to make sense of it. Griffin and Haley lived in a rented condo across town, small, cluttered, and overpriced. They'd never liked her house. They'd called it too moody and haunted chic, so why were they here and why did they have keys? She tried the back door. Locked. Mara pulled out her phone, hands shaking. Her mother's number blinked back at her. She stared at it, then swiped it away. She wasn't ready, not yet. Not until she had answers. Walking back toward the front, she noticed the little brass plate beside the door had been polished. That was new. The porch light had been replaced too. Hers had been a copper lantern. This one was black iron, sleeker, cheaper, like someone had begun to erase her taste from the place. 3 years ago, Mara had bought this house in ruins. The porch sagged. The windows were nailed shut. It smelled like mildew and sadness. She'd bought it anyway with her divorce settlement with grit, with the certainty that if she rebuilt something with her own hands, maybe it wouldn't be taken from her again. She had sanded every banister, restored every rosette molding. Junie had helped paint her room dark teal like the ocean at night. It had taken everything Mara had left after the custody hearings, but it had become home. For both of them. And now, the lock had changed. She was about to knock when she heard Haley's voice through the open kitchen window. "I told you," Haley said, gently stroking her belly. "It already feels like home." Mara didn't breathe. She didn't move. The words hit her like ice water down her spine. Her hand hovered just above the door. Not shaking now. Steady. Controlled. Mara Ellison, 38-years-old architect of homes long forgotten by the rest of Savannah, had never run from confrontation. Not in court, not during her divorce. Not when Junie had cried through nights missing a father who only sent postcards. She had stood through all of it, but this was different. This was her sanctuary, and someone had changed the locks. She finally knocked. Firm. 3 times. Inside, the laughter stopped. The door opened like nothing was wrong, like it was still hers. Griffin stood there in socks and a t-shirt that said, "Sharu1 Dad a joke," surely considering the baby hadn't been born yet. His sandy hair was longer than she remembered, and he looked like he hadn't shaved in days. He blinked at her with that half-sheepish, half-clueless expression he'd perfected since they were teenagers. Behind him, the kitchen was spotless. Too spotless. Like someone had been preparing for company. "Mara," he said, almost surprised. "Hey, you're back early. I wasn't scheduled to be gone forever," she replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The air smelled like vanilla and lemons, Haley's signature scent. The scent that didn't belong here. Griffin scratched the back of his neck. "It's just temporary." Mara turned to face him. "What exactly is temporary?" He gestured vaguely toward the house, the walls, the floor beneath them. "This. Us. Being here." Mom and Dad said Mom and Dad. Her voice tightened, and as if summoned, the front door swung open again. Karen and Walter Ellison stepped into the hallway like a Broadway entrance, carrying a tray of muffins and a reusable bag of hand towels. Her mother's face lit up in that too bright way that always made Mara feel like she was missing something obvious. "Oh, good you're here. We were going to text you, but thought it'd be nicer to surprise you in person." Mara folded her arms. "Surprise." Her father offered a nod, more cautious. "It's just for a little while, sweetheart. Griffin and Haley needed some space. The baby's coming soon, and you've got, well, this whole place to yourself most of the time." Mara stared at them, then at her brother. "So, you all decided that while I was gone, you'd just move in." Griffin raised both hands. "We didn't touch your room, and it's not like you and Junie don't travel all the time anyway. It's not permanent." Mom said Mara cut him off. "Stop saying Mom said like it's legally binding." Karen clucked her tongue and walked past her, setting the muffins down on the counter. "This is what families do, Mara. We help each other. You have space. Griffin and Haley don't. That doesn't make it your space to give away." Her mother glanced back at her. "You're always so possessive, so rigid. You live alone with a child. Griffin has a growing family." Mara flinched almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. The comment landed. There it was again, the quiet judgment wrapped in practicality. The implied hierarchy, wife, husband, baby sacred. Divorced woman with a child, provisional. She walked down the hall toward the guest room before she could stop herself. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. It wasn't hers anymore. The walls had been painted a soft mint green, still faintly smelling of fresh latex. The vintage dresser she'd refinished with Junie now held a small white noise machine and stacks of swaddling blankets. The bookshelf where she kept travel guides was now lined with parenting books and a framed ultrasound photo. In the center of the room stood a crib, new, glossy, expensive-looking, and above it, in hand-painted wooden letters, hung a sign, "Baby Ellison." Her breath caught. This had been Junie's playroom, where her daughter built forts out of quilts and cardboard, where she kept her rock collection and wrote "No boys allowed" on the closet door with sticky notes. Gone. Replaced. She backed out slowly, turning to face her family. "Did any of you think to ask me?" Once her mother pursed her lips. "Mara, we didn't think you'd mind. You've always been so independent." "That's not an answer." Karen stepped forward, softening her tone the way she always did when she wanted to pivot to guilt. "We thought you'd be glad to help. You've always said family matters. And Griffin's been under a lot of stress. Haley's pregnancy hasn't been easy. They need this. And you—" What?" Mara snapped. "You don't really need all this space," her mother finished. The silence that followed was thick and slow. Mara looked at Griffin, who suddenly found great interest in his shoeless feet. Then to her father, who was already opening the muffins and pretending not to hear. And finally, to her mother, composed, smiling, righteous. Mara's voice was low when she spoke again. "I worked 2 jobs while I raised Junie. I built this house from the studs out with my own hands. I didn't need help. I didn't complain. I didn't ask you for anything." Her mother blinked. "Exactly. You've always managed fine on your own." Mara shook her head. "That doesn't mean you get to take what I built." Karen sighed as if tired. "It's not taking, sweetheart. It's sharing." "No," Mara said clearer now. "It's trespassing." Griffin finally spoke. "Come on, don't make this a legal thing. We're family." And with that, Mara turned and walked to the door. As her hand touched the knob, she looked over her shoulder and said only one thing. Not anymore. Then she stepped outside, shut the door behind her, and locked it, if only in her mind. Mara didn't plan to go upstairs, not right away, but her feet moved before her brain gave permission, pulling her through the familiar rhythm of the hallway up the staircase she had sanded herself past the window, where Junie used to tape construction paper stars. She hesitated at the door to her daughter's room. The sticker letters on the outside had once spelled Junie's World in crooked bubble font. Junie's own creation proudly stuck there the night after her 6th birthday. But now only the faint outline of where the letters had been remained. Someone had scrubbed the door clean. The handle was cool in her palm. She pushed. The room was pink. A soft, dusty pink. Not the ocean blue Junie had picked when she told Mara very seriously that she wanted to fall asleep, inside the sky. The deep navy walls were gone, repainted, covered, erased. The white bookshelves were in the same place, but all of Junie's books were missing. In their place, baby bottles, folded burp cloths, and a stuffed giraffe with a ribbon that said, "Hello, baby." Mara crossed the room slowly like it might break beneath her. The desk by the window where Junie had drawn every day after school was gone. The drawings themselves. Mara's favorite one had been a lopsided giraffe with a crown and a speech bubble that said, "I am the queen," were stacked in a plastic bin in the corner. Labeled, Junie, old art. On the ceiling, a baby mobile spun slowly in the path of the air vent. Dangling felt clouds and yellow stars over the crib that now sat in the center of the room. Mara recognized the crib from an Instagram ad Haley had once shown her, calling it the Bentley of baby furniture. Haley had laughed at how overpriced it was. Apparently she'd bought it anyway with what money Mara didn't know. But what struck Mara hardest wasn't the color or the furniture or even the bin of packed childhood. It was the name stenciled on the wall above the crib. Baby Ellison. Not even a name, just a placeholder. But it stood where Junie's framed watercolor self-portrait had hung for 2 years, slightly crooked, because Junie had insisted she wanted to hammer the nail herself. Mara reached out and touched the edge of the nameplate like it might confirm this wasn't real. That she hadn't left for 48 hours only to come home to find her daughter's existence boxed and pushed aside for a child who hadn't even been born yet. She closed her eyes and memory swept her backward. It was year 1 after the divorce. Junie was 5 and still calling her dad Dada out of habit, even though he hadn't seen her in months. Mara had been gutting the second-floor bathroom when the floor gave way and she fell partway through the drywall. Her wrist had been bruised for a week, her pride longer. That night she curled up on the floor of Junie's room, the paint barely dry, and whispered through tears that she didn't know if she could do this alone. Junie had pulled her blanket over Mara's shoulder and said, "This room is our ship, Mommy. We'll sail it together." Mara had cried harder then. And now the ship had been stripped of its sails. She turned on her heel and strode down the stairs, fury no longer simmering beneath her skin, but rising hot and alive. In the kitchen, her parents sat drinking tea while Griffin scrolled through his phone. Haley had her feet up on the ottoman like she'd been living there for years. Mara didn't ask. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Savannah Police Department," came the voice on the other end. "Yes, I need to report an unauthorized occupation of private property," she said calmly, though her fingers trembled. The woman on the other end asked for her address and situation. Mara explained she was the sole owner of the property her family had entered without consent, changed locks and repurposed rooms. There was a pause. "Do they have any documentation or claim to the house?" Mara blinked. "Of course not." Another pause. "If they're family and have a key and you've previously allowed access, I'm afraid this may be considered a civil dispute. We can send an officer, but we can't forcibly remove anyone without a court order unless there's an immediate threat. They changed the locks on my house. Was the house vacant at the time I was gone for 2 days?" There was another silence. The kind that tells you the law won't be on your side right now. "I'll have to refer you to a property attorney," the dispatcher said. "You can file a report for record, but we won't be able to intervene directly unless there's evidence of criminal activity or a restraining order in place." Mara thanked her, barely able to speak through the rage bubbling in her throat. She ended the call and looked straight at her father. "They won't do anything," she said flatly. He set down his mug with a practiced calm. We figured you might call them. That's why we used the emergency POA from your appendectomy. It's valid. Mara stared at him. That was medical. You weren't authorized to touch my property. It allowed temporary decision-making, he replied. You signed it. I signed it for one hospital stay, she hissed. Not to have my house handed over to my brother. Her mother stood now smoothing down her blouse like she was preparing for a church committee meeting. You gave us permission, Mara. You just don't remember. The room went very still. Outside, a breeze stirred the wind chimes on the porch, and for a moment it sounded like laughter. But not the kind that warmed the heart. No. This laughter was hollow, distant, and full of warning. Mara didn't sleep that night. She paced the creaking floorboards of the guest bedroom in her friend Celine's carriage house, staring at the water stains on the ceiling like they might offer clarity. Celine had handed her the spare key without asking a single question, just wrapped her in a hug and said, I always knew they'd try something like this. And now, at 8:07 a.m., Mara sat in a worn leather chair across from her attorney, surrounded by the clinical smell of dust, toner, and old contracts. Franklin Voss had represented her during the divorce. He was sharp, mild-mannered, and had the kind of southern drawl that lulled judges into trusting him more than they should. He flipped through the manila file in front of him, brow furrowed, as he read the emergency power of attorney document Mara had hastily scanned and emailed the night before. This, he said, tapping the page, only covered medical decisions. Consent for surgery access to hospital records, speaking to your doctors during incapacitation. Standard stuff. Your parents weren't authorized to access property financials or change any legal agreements, unless... He reached for another sheet, his tone darkening. Unless there's an amendment, which there is. Mara leaned in, heart thudding. What kind of amendment? Franklin pulled out a second document and laid it beside the first. Same formatting, same legalese. But this one included an additional clause, an extension granting Mara's parents temporary authority over estate decisions in the event of prolonged recovery or incapacitation. It was dated 2 days after her appendectomy. And it bore her signature, only she'd never signed it. Mara stared at the signature. It looked right at first glance the same looping M, the slightly crooked E in Ellison. But it was wrong. Her handwriting carried pressure and rhythm. This was too smooth, too deliberate. That's not mine, she whispered. Franklin nodded grimly. That's what I thought. He slid the documents into protective sleeves and sat back. Mara, this is serious. If this was altered and filed without your knowledge, and especially if it's being used to claim property access, it could qualify as legal fraud. Can I press charges? You could, but first we'd need a handwriting analysis, a sworn affidavit from you disputing the amendment, and ideally, proof of intent. And, frankly, he sighed, this was done in your name, which means undoing it could be a long fight. Courts are slow when it comes to family matters. They'll ask why you didn't notice earlier. Because I trusted them, she said, bitterness thick in her throat. Franklin gave her a look that was part sympathy, part realism. That's usually the answer. Mara ran a hand through her hair. So what can I do now? We'll file an immediate cease and desist. I'll draft a notice of disputed authority and begin a motion to revoke any estate-related POA claims. But I'll need you to start compiling proof texts, emails, property bills in your name, statements that show the house is exclusively yours. The more paper trail we have, the better. She nodded, swallowing the burn behind her eyes. And if they fight back, then we fight louder. He smiled gently. I've dealt with worse, and I know you didn't rebuild that house from nothing just to hand it over. Mara exhaled. No, I didn't. His phone buzzed just as they stood. Mara reached into her bag to grab her planner when her own phone vibrated. Junie. Camp call. The notification flashed. Mara's stomach dropped. She stepped into the hallway answering with as much calm as she could summon. Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Mommy. Junie's voice was bright and small, full of summer and sun and a trace of uncertainty. Did you find my dragon notebook? I think I left it under my bed. Can you mail it to me? Mara squeezed her eyes shut. The bed wasn't there anymore. The notebook was likely in a box labeled junk, donate. I'll look for it, she said softly. How's camp? It's fun, but Grandma called me. Mara froze. She did. Yeah. She said someone else is using my room now. She said it's okay because I'm at camp and the baby's coming, and you said it was fine. But you didn't say that right. Mara's throat locked. She turned away from the window so no one in the hallway would see the tears already pooling in her eyes. No, honey, she whispered. I didn't say that. There was a pause. So is my stuff okay? Of course, she lied. Because the truth would crack Junie in half. Okay, Junie said. I just didn't want the baby to think it was his room forever. Because it's mine. It's my ship. Mara bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. It's still your ship, Junebug. Always. Okay. Love you. I love you more. She ended the call and stood there, phone clutched, tight, shaking. She had fought for custody with every dollar she had, held Junie through nights of fever and court orders, rebuilt their life one tile, one cabinet, one paycheck at a time. She had never asked for help, not even when she needed it most. And now, because of one signature, she didn't write the life she built was slipping out from under her. But this time, she wasn't going to whisper or wait. This time, she was going to put it in writing. It started with a notification. Mara had turned off social media months ago, at least she'd thought she had. But while she was scrolling through photos of reclaimed mantles for a client, an alert popped up from the old Facebook account she hadn't deleted. Just muted. Just enough to forget. Haley Ellison shared a post. The caption was brief, emotionally loaded. I'm 6 months pregnant and just want a roof over our baby's head. Some people care more about square footage than blood. Family should mean something. Below it, a photo of the front porch Mara had spent 2 months restoring her house bathed in soft afternoon light. Haley sat on the steps, one hand on her stomach, a knitted throw around her shoulders. Griffin stood behind her, all golden hour humility, the comments multiplied by the minute. Some sisters are just bitter and broken. She should be ashamed. That house has more than enough room. You don't evict family when there's a baby on the way. Mara stared at the screen, frozen. They had turned her house, her life, into a morality tale. And in this version, she was the villain. Cold, unyielding, selfish. The photo had over 400 shares by noon. By 2 p.m., her phone vibrated nonstop with texts. From her Aunt Lila. Just let them stay, honey. Babies need peace, not tension. From Cousin Jonah, whom she hadn't seen in years. It's not worth the fight. You'll feel better if you do the right thing. And one from her own grandmother. Her grandmother who once called Mara, the little lion, for fixing her porch steps at 16. They're scared, sweetheart. Be the bigger person. She didn't reply to any of them. Instead, she walked into the break room at her office, poured herself a cup of burnt coffee, and pretended her hands weren't shaking. Her boss, Martin, found her 10 minutes later, gently knocking on the glass door to her office. He was kind but observant, the kind of manager who noticed things like 3 missed meetings or a voice cracking mid-presentation. He shut the door softly. Is everything okay at home? Mara blinked. Excuse me. I heard a few things. Online, a client asked if you were involved in some kind of eviction situation. He hesitated. It's none of my business, but I just want to make sure you're okay. You've always been one of our most reliable project leads. The words reliable and eviction did not belong in the same sentence. Not for someone who'd built her reputation on ethics and empathy and problem-solving under pressure. But the court of public opinion didn't care about nuance or truth. It cared about optics, about pity, about the visual of a pregnant woman displaced by her emotionally distant sister. Mara offered a brittle smile. Everything's in process. Martin nodded slowly. If you need time, I don't, she said too fast. He left her alone after that, but his eyes were different now, cautious. By the time she pulled into Celine's driveway that night, the sky was steel gray and her inbox was on fire. Legal documents from Franklin, more family texts, and one voicemail from Haley's sister who accused Mara of weaponizing trauma to sabotage a child's future. She didn't go inside. Instead, she sat in the driver's seat with the engine off the keys dangling from the ignition like an afterthought, and stared at the dashboard until her vision blurred. She didn't cry often. She didn't have time to. But this wasn't just about a room or a POA. This was about erasure. They had erased Junie. Not literally, of course, but symbolically. Room by room, wall by wall. They had painted over her daughter's voice, boxed up her imagination, and rewritten the story so that the child who had lived there for 7 years was now an inconvenience. A ghost. They wanted Mara to feel guilty for defending space. But it wasn't space she was defending. It was her daughter's existence, her history, their bond. Inside the house, the porch light clicked on. Celine must have seen her headlights and was waiting. Mara turned off the ignition and walked in slowly, quietly, like if she didn't speak, the weight of it wouldn't follow her through the door. Celine sat at the kitchen counter with a bowl of cereal and a bottle of wine, a pairing she swore by during emotional triage. She didn't ask questions, just poured a second glass and slid it across the counter. Mara sat, stared at it, then finally spoke. They erased my daughter to make space for their legacy. Celine blinked. Spoon paused midair. That's what this is, Mara said. It's not about a crib or a Facebook post. It's about who gets remembered, whose name goes on the wall. Celine set down the spoon. They took her room. They took everything, her desk, her books. Her drawings are in a bin labeled old art. They changed the walls, hung a mobile, stuck the words Baby Ellison where Junie's name used to be. Like she never lived there, like she never mattered. Her voice cracked on the last word. Celine reached over and gripped her hand. Then let's make sure the world remembers she did. Mara didn't answer. But in the silence that followed, something shifted, not in her mind, but in her bones. She wasn't done. She was just beginning. The dining room table had belonged to Mara's great-grandmother. Mahogany, claw-footed, restored by Mara herself one winter between court dates and client consults. Tonight it was set with mismatched china and the heavy silver her mother brought out for important family meals. Haley had done the centerpiece's baby's breath eucalyptus and a small carved block that read, "Family is everything." The irony wasn't subtle. Neither was the performance. Mara sat at the far end of the table, a full chair's space between her and anyone else. Her parents sat across from Griffin and Haley, who dabbed at her eyes like a well-practiced Southern belle. Someone had made pot roast. No one was eating. She didn't want to do this here, not around meat and forced pleasantries, but this was the only time they were all in one place without Junie or witnesses or lawyers, just them, just truth. "I want you out of my house," Mara said, voice steady, clear. Forks froze. Griffin leaned back like she'd accused him of theft, maybe because she had. "Mara?" Her mother started already in that soft, scolding tone she used in grocery stores and funerals. "No," Mara said. "This isn't a discussion. It's a line." Her father, ever the diplomat in pressed shirts and polite disdain, cleared his throat. "You've always had a flair for drama." She turned to him, jaw tight. "Is this dramatic, wanting my own house back?" He met her eyes without flinching. "You've always chosen yourself, first with the divorce, then moving to a city like Savannah instead of staying near family. Now this, choosing property over people." Mara blinked. "You mean choosing survival?" "No," he said, calm as ever. "I mean selfishness." Griffin jumped in, voice higher than usual. "You don't even need that much space, Mara. It's just you and Junie. We're a growing family. Then grow somewhere else. Do you even hear yourself?" Haley's voice cracked mid-sentence. "This baby your nephew is going to grow up without a home because of you." Mara stared at her, the table, the stupid centerpieces. Flashback. She was 19. Her beat-up Civic paid for by 2 years of tutoring and weekend shifts parked in front of a 7-Eleven with the driver's side caved in. Griffin, 15 at the time, standing beside it with a scraped elbow and a story full of holes. He'd taken her keys without asking, gone joyriding with his friends, and smashed into a parking pillar. Her parents had driven up, stared at the wreck, and turned to Mara. "You should have been more responsible," her mother said. You didn't teach him how serious this is, her dad added. She had paid the deductible. Griffin didn't lose so much as his video game privileges. Back at the table, Mara inhaled once slowly. You say, I always choose myself, she said. But what you mean is, I don't choose you, your expectations, your definitions of worth, your fragile image of family that only works if I stay silent and give up what's mine. Haley sniffled loudly. We're not the enemy, Mara. We're just trying to raise a child. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. That house, she began, and her voice wavered for the first time, isn't just wood and walls. It's 3 years of rebuilding after my ex drained our savings. It's tile I laid, while Junie slept beside me on the floor. It's the first space in my life that no one else designed for me. I didn't just restore that house, I restored us. And you... She looked directly at her parents, then Griffin. You walked in and erased that like it meant nothing. You boxed up my daughter's memories like junk mail. You replaced her name with a fetus who doesn't even have a crib in your own home. There was silence. And then her mother, quietly, as though reasoning with a wayward child, said, It's just a room, Mara. It's not like we threw Junie away. Mara's lip curled. Did you ask her how it felt? Did you call her before you changed the walls? Before you told the world I was some bitter old woman hoarding space from a baby? Haley looked like she might cry again. We thought you'd understand. I do understand, Mara snapped. I understand exactly what you did. They all looked at her like she was the ungrateful one, the complication, the outlier. Then Haley placed her hands on her belly, her voice trembling. You'll regret this when the baby asks why his aunt never came around, why he doesn't know you. Mara's reply came cold and clean. Then maybe you should have built him a home he could be proud of. The next morning, the air smelled like sun-warmed pine and betrayal. Mara pulled into the driveway just after 8 a.m., heart pounding like a drum beneath her ribs. She hadn't been back since the dinner, since her mother's voice had twisted around the word selfish like a verdict. But she needed to see it, all of it. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as a mother, but as a woman preparing for battle. She parked by the side gate, avoiding the main entrance, and let herself into the garage with the keypad code only she remembered to reset every few months. As the door creaked open, light spilled in over boxes stacked in uneven towers. Her boxes. She recognized them, immediately brown cardboard with her scribbled Sharpie labels from when she'd moved back into the house after finalizing the divorce. Junie's room, one read. Another, crafts and paint supplies. They'd been shoved to the far corner, dust gathering around them like relics of a past someone had decided was no longer relevant. She knelt and opened the top box. Inside, Junie's hand-drawn storybook from kindergarten, The Dragon with 2 moms. Pages bent, glitter smeared. The corner had a muddy footprint. The next box held her daughter's framed photos. The small lamp shaped like a moon and the stuffed polar bear Mara had driven 3 hours to buy after a tough dentist appointment. Behind that, rolled and cracked from pressure, was the mural Mara and Junie had painted together, her daughter's version of the Savannah Marshes, dotted with imaginary creatures only a 7-year-old could dream up. And then, in a shallow crate, propped behind the rest, was a bundle of crumpled drawings. Torn edges, thumbtack holes, folded in half with creases like scars. She pulled one free. A crayon sketch of their house, Junie, standing beside it with the word ours written in shaky block letters. Mara stared for a long time, then pulled out her phone. She took photo after photo, the boxes, the papers, the mural. She zoomed in on the label, storage, do not open yet. They weren't just pushing her out. They had already erased her. The screen lit up with a message as she stood. Mom, I hope you'll come to your senses soon. Griffin signed the lease today. You'll love the studio. It's modern and very close to that co-op grocery you like. We handled the deposit. Think of it as a gift. Mara almost laughed. A gift. She walked out of the garage and around the side of the house. The backyard was immaculate, trimmed and weeded the garden she planted with native perennials now overrun with Haley's potted succulents. There were wind chimes by the porch steps, new cushions on the swing. It was like she never lived there. Inside, she knew Haley would be upstairs, resting, rearranging nursery baskets. Griffin, probably in the kitchen, acting like the king of a kingdom he didn't build. They'd been planning this for months. The studio wasn't an accident. It wasn't kindness. It was strategy. They knew Mara would never offer to move, so they made the decision for her, dressed it up as generosity, packaged it in guilt. She stood at the back door, hands on the cool wood, and imagined kicking it in. Not to confront them, she'd done enough of that, but to take back what was hers. Instead, she turned away and walked quickly back to the car. She had what she needed, evidence. By the time she reached Celine's driveway, she'd uploaded everything to a private folder. Then she emailed it all to Franklin Voss with a subject line that simply read, "They've made it official." It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed with a reply. Franklin Voss, photos received. "You've got a strong case for constructive eviction, possible POA misuse, and property fraud. We file Monday. Get some rest this weekend, we're going to war." Mara stared at the message. Then she picked up Junie's drawing on the one with the house and the little girl, marked hours, and smoothed it gently across the counter. A crease remained down the center, but the lines were still visible, the color still bold. They'd tried to bury her story, but Mara Ellison was done letting other people write the ending. The late afternoon light filtered through the Spanish moss, casting long, delicate shadows across Celine's porch steps. Mara sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of legal documents flickering across her face as the cicadas droned like static in the trees. She was supposed to be gathering evidence receipts, utility bills, original POA forms. Instead, she was staring at a blank email draft, her fingers limp on the keys. The adrenaline from Franklin's message had faded. What was left behind was quieter, heavier, like ash after a fire. She didn't hear the footsteps until the wood creaked beneath them. "Excuse me, Miss Ellison," a voice said gently. "Hope I'm not intruding." She looked up and squinted into the light. Mr. Whitman, her neighbor from 3 doors down on Juniper Street, retired school principal, always wore pressed slacks and a weathered Braves cap. He had a habit of trimming his hedges at sunrise and waving at everyone like they'd grown up together. He held a manila envelope in one hand and a paper bag in the other. "I didn't want to bother you," he said, stepping carefully onto the porch, "but I thought you might want this." Mara blinked. "What is it?" "Well," he said, setting the bag down, "banana bread. My wife, when she was alive, used to say no one should cry on an empty stomach. Figured it couldn't hurt." She tried to smile. "Failed. That's kind of you." He handed her the envelope. "And this is just something I thought you should have." Mara took it, her fingers brushing the edge. "Last Tuesday," Mr. Whitman continued, "I was out on the porch cleaning gutters, like I do. Saw a few folks loading up your garage. Your mama, that boy of yours. The pregnant one was sitting in the rocking chair on your porch like she paid taxes there." Mara's throat tightened. "You came out at one point," he said. "Told them to stop. I remember because your voice cracked just a little, like it cost you something to say it. And they just kept going." She opened the envelope. Inside 6 photos. Blurry, but clear enough. Griffin carrying a bin labeled Junie's Art. Her mother handing Haley a set of keys. One picture showed the side of Mara's face as she stood by the garage, arms crossed, tight mouth open mid-sentence, caught in the act of protesting. "I didn't mean to spy," Mr. Whitman added softly. "But when I saw what they were doing, it didn't sit right. That's not how families supposed to treat each other." Mara clutched the envelope. "Thank you. I didn't expect—" "I figured as much," he said, lowering himself carefully onto the porch chair across from her. "I've lived on that street 40 years, seen families come and go. Yours always looks so rehearsed." She tilted her head. "Rehearsed?" He nodded. "You know the type. Perfect Christmas lights. Polite barbecue invites everyone smiling for the neighborhood photos, but something cold underneath. Like everything had to be a performance." That, Mara thought, was the most accurate thing anyone had said in months. She glanced down at the envelope in her lap. "They think I'm just bitter. A failed marriage. A daughter too stubborn to play along. A sister who won't sacrifice enough." Mr. Whitman adjusted his cap. "No. They think you're quiet. That's different." She looked up. They think quiet means weak, he continued. Means forgettable. Means you won't push back hard enough to make trouble. But you've been holding up a whole world on your back for years. They just never stopped to notice. Mara inhaled sharply, then exhaled with something close to a shudder. May I ask you something, Mr. Whitman? He nodded. Why help me? He smiled, then not big, not flashy. Just the soft, weathered grin of someone who'd seen people rise and fall and rise again, because you built that house with your own 2 hands. I watched you paint shutters at midnight, saw you fixing gutters with your little girl, handing you screws. That place isn't just yours, it's you. They think they're taking walls and furniture. What they're really doing is stealing your story. Mara couldn't stop the tears this time. They came fast, unannounced, warm down her cheeks as she clenched the envelope to her chest. Mr. Whitman sat there, quietly letting her cry. No rush, no advice. After a while, she found her voice again. I was starting to think no one saw me. He shook his head. We did. You just didn't hear us over all the noise. The light shifted again, dusk settling like a blanket over the porch. When Mr. Whitman stood to leave, he placed one hand gently on her shoulder. If you need a witness when the time comes, he said, you know where to find me. Mara nodded, throat too thick for words. And as she watched him walk back down the steps, envelope still pressed to her ribs, something inside her realigned. She wasn't just preparing to fight. She was preparing to be heard. The envelope was heavy, not physically, but with the weight of everything it represented. Boundaries, truth, and finally, consequences. Franklin had couriered it overnight, the kind of official letterhead and legal tone that made people sit straighter and speak softer. Mara held it for a full minute before stepping out of Celine's house, walking down the sidewalk to the Ellison family mailbox, her mailbox still technically attached to the deed, and sliding it in. She didn't linger. She didn't look back. By noon, the group chat buzzed. First her mother, Mara, please tell me this isn't real, then Griffin. You've lost it. This isn't how family handles things. And finally, Haley radio silence until 2 hours later when Mara opened Facebook and saw the post. Imagine suing the people who raised you, who gave you everything, who only wanted to help. I'm 6 months pregnant and homeless because my sister chose square footage over blood. I hope our son never learns bitterness from you. The photo was of Haley on the porch swing belly front in center sunlight washing over her like a divine spotlight. The comment section filled quickly. She's heartless. Some women really do crumble after divorce. That poor baby. Mara didn't respond. Not at first. Instead, she sat at the edge of the bed she was borrowing in Celine's guest room laptop open beside her phone, warm in her hand. She stared at Junie's folder of scanned artwork scrolling past mermaid castles and marsh dragons and hand-drawn maps of imaginary cities. And then she found it. The handprint. Junie had made it in first grade, red paint on a canvas, her name spelled in careful block letters beneath it. Mara remembered the day clearly. Her daughter had come home beaming, waving the picture like a flag. It's not just a hand, she'd said. It's my mark, like a stamp that says I live here. Mara uploaded the photo. Caption: This is her home, not your nursery. She hit post. It didn't go viral, it didn't explode, it simmered quietly like a pot left just long enough to boil. And then came the messages. A DM from a former client. They did the same to my aunt. Stay strong. A comment from a neighbor: I watched you rebuild that house one window at a time. You deserve to protect it. Then another and another. Thank you for speaking up. My sister tried to evict me after my divorce. I thought I was crazy. It's not about a house, it's about being erased. By midnight, Haley's post had more sad emojis than hearts. The tide had shifted, not because Mara had shouted louder, but because she finally spoke in a voice that was hers, not filtered through shame or silence. Franklin texted the next morning. Franklin Voss. They have 72 hours to respond. If they don't vacate or issue a formal retraction, we file in Chatham County. Based on their online posts, we now also have a defamation angle. Mara read the message while sipping lukewarm coffee on Celine's porch, the photo of Junie's handprint now pinned to the top of her profile. Her mother hadn't responded. Her father, predictably, had gone silent. But Griffin had texted once just one sentence. "You'll regret this when no one comes for Christmas." Mara stared at it for a long time, then deleted the message, because Christmas wasn't about people who showed up once a year to take photos and pass judgment. It was about the ones who stayed, who held your hand when everything cracked, who painted stars on ceilings to make the dark feel smaller. That night, she framed the photo of Junie's handprint, set it beside the front door at Celine's place, a placeholder, until they went home. It wasn't loud like Mara imagined it might be. No shouting, no broken glass, no screaming accusations hurled across the porch. When Griffin and Haley left, it was quiet. Bitter, yes, but quiet like the house itself had finally exhaled. They didn't say goodbye. Haley wore sunglasses, even though it was overcast, her lips pulled tight as she loaded the last of the baby gear into the back of Griffin's truck. Griffin didn't look at Mara once. He moved like someone fulfilling a court order, efficient mechanical. The only words spoken were to each other clipped and low as they stacked boxes marked nursery and bathroom essentials. Beside the azaleas Mara had planted 2 springs ago, a courier had hand-delivered the cease and desist 2 days earlier with legal backing, so airtight Franklin had called it a velvet hammer. The document had demanded immediate removal from the premises, cessation of online defamation, and restoration of Mara's full property rights. It worked. They hadn't fought it. Not openly, at least. Maybe because the letter made it real. Maybe because the internet wasn't as sympathetic as they'd hoped. Or maybe they knew they'd gone too far. Mara watched from across the street in her car engine, idling low. She didn't want to be on the porch when they left. She didn't want the false apologies, the silent blame, the lingering smell of Haley's lavender detergent that clung to the baby blankets like a fog. She waited until the truck turned the corner and disappeared into the Spanish moss. Only then did she drive home. The house greeted her like a memory, one brick at a time. She walked through the front door and inhaled. It smelled like wood polish and dust and something faintly floral. But underneath it all, beneath the chaos, the trespassing of trust, it still smelled like hers. The pastel paint was still on the guest room walls. The Baby Ellison door sign still hung like a flag claiming stolen land. She took it down without ceremony and placed it in the trash. Then she opened the toolbox. By nightfall, every lock had been replaced. Front door, back door, garage, even the shed. Cameras had been installed above each entrance, angled to catch every inch of approach. Motion sensors, app alerts, backup batteries. She'd drawn her line. Now she was defending it. Franklin called, just after sunset. "They're out," he said. No preamble. "I know," she replied. "I watched them drive off. There's enough here to press criminal charges if you want," he added. "Forgery, constructive eviction, defamation, misuse of emergency authority. It's solid." Mara sat at the top of the stairs, her feet bare against the hardwood she'd laid herself one summer, while Junie napped upstairs. The house was quiet now, but not empty. Just still. "I want them out," she said after a moment. "Not destroyed." Franklin was quiet for a beat. "Understood. We'll keep it civil, but if they violate the agreement, we move forward." "Fair," she said. When the call ended, Mara wandered into Junie's room. It had been stripped bare by Griffin and Haley, but now slowly it was coming back together. The mural she and Junie had started half-finished stars and waves sketched in chalk still clung to the far wall. Mara traced one of the curves with her fingertip and smiled. There was time now, time to finish what they started. Her phone buzzed, a message from Junie's camp counselor. "She wanted me to send this from the art tent today," she said. "It's for Mom, so she knows we still live in our house." Attached a photo. Junie's drawing showed their Southern Gothic home under a night sky. Yellow stars dotted the paper. 2 stick figures stood in front, one taller, one smaller, both smiling. Above them, in blocky, imperfect handwriting, "Our house with our stars." Mara's throat tightened as she stared at the image. It wasn't just a house Junie had drawn. It was a map, a declaration, a memory anchored to place. She saved the image to her favorites. Then She walked through the house, switching off lights, locking the new locks, double-checking the camera notifications. And as she climbed into bed that night, the drawing still glowing faintly on her phone screen beside her, Mara knew this wasn't just a legal victory. It was reclamation, not just of bricks and beams, but of voice, of space, of self, of home. The paint cans were lined up like sentinels along the baseboard, their lids popped open and breathing in the summer air. The scent of fresh lavender gray spread through the room like a quiet promise, clean, soft, a beginning. Mara stood, barefoot on the drop cloth, a roller in one hand, and her other resting on the doorframe. Behind her, a box labeled Junie. Bedroom sat half open, its flaps pushed back like wings. Good call on the color, said Elena, the painter Mara had hired. Middle-aged, no nonsense, and with paint specks permanently tattooed onto her forearms, Elena moved with the ease of someone who didn't rush the work. It's calm, but not sad. Mara smiled faintly. I didn't want it to feel like a reset, just a return. Elena nodded. That's the difference between painting over something and painting for something. They worked mostly in silence, a quiet rhythm between them. Elena handled the ceiling trim, her ladder creaking gently with each reposition. Mara focused on the walls, slow even strokes, not rushing any of it. She moved with intention. No anger, no tension, just focus. The kind that comes when your mind and your hands finally agree to stop spinning. The room took shape quickly. The crib had been dismantled and stored in the garage. The mobile quietly dropped at a donation center. In its place, a new white shelf built with clean lines and space for both books and dragons. The rug Junie had picked out last spring, turquoise with gold stars, was back in its rightful place. Mara even reassembled the small desk with its mismatched knobs, each drawer a different color Junie had insisted on when they first built it together. It was nearly sunset when Mara turned her attention to the last sealed box. It had been in the garage since the takeover, shoved behind a water heater marked in her mother's handwriting, Junie's old art. Keep or toss. Mara sat on the floor and opened it. Inside were stacks of crumpled construction paper, glitter-glued snowflakes, scribbled family portraits, paper crowns, and dozens of finger paintings. It was like flipping through time. A whole childhood lived in swirls and smudges. Near the bottom, folded neatly into a plastic sleeve, was a piece of lined notebook paper in Junie's blocky 6-year-old handwriting. The title read, Letter to Future Me. Mara unfolded it slowly. The crayon marks faded at the edges. Dear me in the future. I hope we still live in our house. Please don't let anyone take our house. I love my room and the ceiling stars. If I'm big, now maybe I helped paint more. That would be cool. Love me but little. P.S. Don't let Grandma throw away Mr. Pickle. He's under the bed. Mara sat back the paper, trembling in her hands. For a moment, the whole room shifted, time folding in on itself. She saw 6-year-old Junie curled up under that very desk during a thunderstorm, whispering stories to a stuffed penguin. She remembered the nights they'd slept together on the floor when the house still had no heat, eating cereal for dinner and laughing anyway. She remembered the day they'd painted glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, Mara, hoisting her daughter up with a paintbrush and a flashlight. And now this letter. Not a plea for toys or candy, but a wish to belong. The tears came not with rage, not with despair, just release. Years of holding her breath, years of defending her choices, her daughter, her home, years of being told she was too cold, too hard, too different. She wasn't crying because she was broken. She was crying because she was still whole. Elena must have noticed the shift in air because she peeked around the doorframe. You okay? She asked gently. Mara nodded, brushing her cheek with the back of her hand. Yeah, she said. Actually, yeah, I am. Elena stepped in, glanced at the letter, then gave a quiet nod of approval. Looks like you've got a pretty smart kid. The smartest, Mara said softly. They finished the last coat together in silence. When the room dried and the furniture was set, Mara stood in the doorway and stared. It wasn't perfect. The paint still had wet spots near the baseboards. The shelf wobbled a little if you bumped it too hard. The rug still curled at one corner. But it was theirs. Not a nursery. Not a compromise. Not an afterthought. A room for a girl who asked to leave stars on her ceiling so she could always find her way back. That night, Mara took the crayon letter and slid it into a frame. She placed it above the desk where Junie would see it every morning and every night. Tomorrow, she would pick her up from camp. Tomorrow, they would come home. Together. The minivan's door slid open with a soft thud, and Junie's feet hit the gravel before Mara had even finished unbuckling her seatbelt. Camp counselors waved goodbye in the rearview mirror as Mara stepped out onto the driveway, barely getting her arms open before Junie flung herself into them. "I missed you more than mac and cheese," Junie whispered into her neck, clinging tight. Mara smiled, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "That much, huh?" Junie nodded, curls bouncing, even more than seconds. They stood like that for a moment, just the two of them wrapped in late summer sun and silence that didn't need filling. Then Junie pulled back and looked at the house. Her brows furrowed slightly. "Did they try to take it?" Mommy Mara paused. No rehearsed line would fit. No sugarcoat would feel right. "Yes," she said quietly, "but we took it back." Junie nodded again, as if confirming something she'd already known in her bones. Then she reached for her mom's hand. "Can I see my room?" Mara smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." They walked through the front door together, their steps soft on the worn floorboards. Junie didn't speak as they passed through the hallway, the walls newly wiped clean, the sun slanting in through the arched windows. But her grip on Mara's hand tightened just a little. And then they reached the room. Junie stepped over the threshold like it might vanish under her feet. Her eyes swept over the soft lavender-gray walls, the new shelf with her books and stuffed animals, the turquoise rug, the desk with its wild-colored drawers, and finally the framed letter above it. Her own words in her own crayon scrawl. Letter, "To future me." Junie blinked, then smiled. "You saved it. I always save the good stuff," Mara said, her voice quiet. Junie walked to the center of the rug and lay down flat on her back, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars, still clinging to the ceiling. She pointed. "You missed one. That one's crooked." "Impossible," Mara said. "That one's a comet." Junie laughed. The sound was high and bright, like the room had been holding its breath all summer, and finally remembered how to exhale. In the kitchen, Mara cracked eggs into a pan while their favorite song played low from the Bluetooth speaker on the windowsill. Junie danced behind her, making up words that didn't rhyme, twirling in mismatched socks. Mara slid pancakes onto a plate and added a generous swirl of whipped cream. Junie gasped like she'd been given treasure. No one at camp made pancakes with clouds, she said, mouth already full. "Amateurs," Mara replied. They ate at the kitchen island, sunlight pooling between them, and for a moment there was nothing else, no lawsuits, no Facebook posts, no locks changed or rooms stolen. Just a mother and daughter home again. After breakfast, Junie set her fork down carefully. "I told Mr. Fred at camp that you're the bravest mom." Mara arched an eyebrow. "Mr. Fred with the banjo?" Junie nodded. "He said brave people don't always yell. Sometimes they just stand really still when the ground shakes, and then they build again." Mara looked at her daughter, the same girl who had once said her room was a ship in a storm, who had packed her plush penguin and toothbrush without complaining when they had to stay at Aunt Celine's, who had drawn stars when others drew castles. "I'm not the bravest," Mara said softly. "I'm just a mom who finally said no loud enough." Junie considered that, then took her hand. "Well, I'm glad you did." So was Mara. They spent the rest of the day doing small things that felt like everything refilling the bookshelf, putting Mr. Pickle back under the bed he'd been washed, per Junie's request, and finishing the chalk outline of a seahorse they'd started months ago in the backyard. When the sun finally dipped below the magnolia trees, they lay on the porch swing, together, wrapped in an old quilt, the cicadas humming a lullaby somewhere in the distance. "You think the stars will still be there tomorrow?" Junie asked. "They always are," Mara whispered, "even when you can't see them." And in the quiet that followed, she knew this house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a promise. Not that life would always be kind, but that they would always return, together. The autumn sun filtered through the magnolia branches, dappling the back garden in soft gold. A folding table held iced tea notepads and 3 well-worn sketchbooks. Around it sat 5 women, each different in age, posture, and quiet strength, but all leaning forward now as Mara spoke. Sometimes Mara said, holding up a simple floor plan, we build walls because we're afraid. But sometimes we build them to know where the door should be. A few of the women smiled. One jotted something down quickly. Another nodded, eyes distant. Behind Mara, the garden's edge curved around raised beds and a newly painted white trellis she'd finished with Junie last weekend. Her daughter's stars, the chalk-drawn kind, not the ceiling kind, still dotted the stones. Mr. Pickle had made a surprise appearance as the unofficial mascot of the morning. He sat now in a small chair, beside Junie's sketchpad supervising. The workshop was Mara's idea. Not a grand seminar, not a flashy brand launch, just something gentle needed. She'd called it Designing Boundaries Emotional and Architectural. It started as a joke, something she muttered to her friend Elena over coffee. But then came the messages. The single mom in Bluffton who'd lost her rental after a divorce. The older woman whose adult children dismissed her desire to renovate just to start her home. The recently widowed nurse who confessed over email that she hadn't picked out her own curtains in 23 years. One woman had driven down from Asheville just to walk the garden and sit at Mara's table. Her name was Rachel, early 40s, newly divorced, overwhelmed and apologetic. I've never held a hammer, she'd said. On the first day, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara had simply handed her a measuring tape. Good. No bad habits. Over the months, Rachel came back, week after week. They started restoring a 1-bedroom bungalow she'd inherited from an aunt she barely knew. Mara guided her through patching drywall, choosing trim, rerouting plumbing, and more importantly, believing she had a right to decide what home should feel like. Now, as the group packed up, Rachel lingered. I used to think homes were just places you got stuck in, she said almost to herself. Now it feels like something I get to build. Mara smiled. Then you're doing it right. When the last chair was folded and the last cup rinsed, Mara walked the garden path back toward the house. She passed the porch swing. The light hit the white siding just right, making it glow faintly. Her boots crunched over gravel she and Junie had spread together by hand. Inside, the house breathed like it always had, quiet, warm, lived in, no curated perfection. Just stories in the walls and a name back on a bedroom door. In the living room, Junie was building something with popsicle sticks and glue. It's a rocket, she explained, but for dolls. So like a doll rocket. An essential addition to modern life, Mara said, smoothing back a curl from her daughter's forehead. Junie beamed. Later, once her daughter was asleep, dreaming no doubt of intergalactic fashion shows, Mara stepped into her own studio. The drafting table was cluttered, the bulletin board full. Blueprints layered over handwritten affirmations. A mix of scale and soul. She stood at the window, looking out at the garden where a handful of women had spent their morning, not just learning how to build walls, but when to say this far and no further. And in that soft, cooling stillness, she thought, they said, I chose a house over family. She smiled, slow and certain. They were wrong. I chose my daughter. I chose myself. I chose peace. Not the peace that comes from avoidance, but the kind born of fight, of bruised knuckles and tired nights, of being called difficult, dramatic, too proud. The peace that isn't gifted, but claimed. Because some homes are passed down like heirlooms. Others are fought for. And every scar, every tear, every hour spent saying no, louder than the world expected, was worth it. Mara turned off the light, whispering the final truth to the dark. Some homes are inherited. Others are fought for and worth every bruise.